Welcome, folks. Glad to see everybody joining. We have a really excellent um, uh, show for you. Um, you're not seeing a double on the other side of your screen. We are being joined by one Groh-Wargo, who is a really great old friend. We've been
He's
through
not old, Mike.
through through many battles together. Um, and she's someone I've enormous respect for. She twice managed Stacey Abrams' campaign for governor, which should tell you all everything you need to know as there's more. She started Fair Fight Action, which is I think what one of the most important groups in the South that's taking on the battle against the crushing of elections and voter suppression and all of those things in at ground zero. Like, while many of us are trying to prevent this from happening nationally, Lauren's been there in the trenches fighting it for a very long time. So really glad, especially at this moment, that Lauren happens to be in Anat's house. And so they're going to do this lot together. I also mentioned that next Monday at 1, I'm going to be joined by Jason Stanley, who, if you don't know, is a really important scholar of fascism in this country, and we'll send some more information about him. So I would kick it off with the really immense threats that are going on in Georgia, counting, and you know that under illegal pretext, the DOJ and FBI did a raid on Polk County ballots and much, much more. So take it away.
That's great. Mike, you might want to plug into a wired headset. We're getting a bunch of echoes and feedback. But I'll take it while you plug.
Go ahead. I'm not sure what I can do, but go ahead.
Maybe mute while Lauren's talking.
What?
I said maybe hit mute while Lauren is talking.
Okay.
I'm excited to be here in Oakland with Anat, and we've been recounting all of our struggles and opportunities already this morning. This is another really big week in the fight against the autocratic takeover of our elections, which is underway currently. And today in Fulton County is a big court deadline. Folks remember that the FBI raided the Fulton County Election Center about a month or so ago under a completely debunked set of claims and bad actors theories about the 2020 election, really all about to create a pretense for meddling in the elections going forward and to create and sow doubt. Very much a big power move. As we all know, Trump has been trying to get his hands on ballots for some time, and the fact that he found the right patsies at the FBI and DOJ to execute on this and got a magistrate judge to sign off on this warrant and the rest of it has been a really, really big fight. Today, there is a sort of intermediate battle going on. The county, Fulton County, which is where I live, has sued.
Which you should say, just for people, that's Atlanta. That's basically.
It's in Atlanta and some of our suburbs. It's the biggest county in the state. It's the most Black registered voters in any county in the South, and the 9th largest county of registered Black voters in the country. It's our largest it's our largest number of voters in the state of Georgia. So the county's been fighting the Trump DOJ to say that the materials need to be returned. Allegedly, the ballots and images and all the data that they've taken has not been touched by the federal government at this point. It's caught up in court and they're in federal court. Today, there's a medium battle going on where the county has asked subpoenaed to get a leading FBI agent on the stand to talk about all of this. DOJ is moving to quash that subpoena. And today, by end of day, we're going to see some briefing by the county. every part of this battle, be it in the courtroom, in the court of public opinion, what's going on in the Georgia legislature, has massive implications nationally. And I think one of the biggest consequences that people have not contemplated on this, and this is that you don't steal an election overnight, you build over time, right? And I know this audience remembers just last year, Putin was on American soil and Trump put his arm around him and said, we need to run elections like this guy, right? So that is what they're building to. But one of the biggest consequences I'd offer for this conversation and all of us to start thinking about is election administrators are just like any other professional group of people. They have national associations, professional associations. They have informal networks and Facebook groups, but they have massive networks. The entire ecosystem of American election administrators now knows that 6 years from now, their name could be put in a BS warrant and they could be accused of a criminal conspiracy for doing their job. The chilling impact on just the mechanics of elections, that die is already cast. Normal people who work in elections and volunteers were named in this warrant. This is no matter what happens from today, that has already set a really terrible precedent. So we're going to see what happens in this sort of day-to-day battle. But I would say the other context here, Mike, and I know you know this, is that since the criminal warrant and raid of Fulton County, where literally 25 FBI agents showed up with chainsaws to cut through the cages where the materials were being stored. Since that happened, there's been a grand jury subpoena of the Republican state Senate president in Arizona to get their hands on 2020 materials. And we're seeing strategies and tactics change and differ on how this unspools, but all of it is related to the same set of bad actors, the same set of conspiracy theories, and at the end is a power move. So that is kind of the moment we're in. While at the federal government, they're debating the Save America Act, which Anat and I like to call the Voter Elimination Act. That's happening. And then the last thing that's happening today at the same time is the Georgia State Election Board, which is run by a bunch of Trump allies, unelected people. They are using part of the meeting today, Mike, for a national rollout of a new voter purge tool. They're bringing Mike Lindell to today. You can't even make this up. It's a whole cast of nightmarish characters coming to the Georgia State Election Board to present. Basically, they're doing a press conference at the state election board around this new voter purge tool while the SAVE Act is being debated in Congress. So it is yet another big day for American democracy.
Basically, they're trying to smother free and fair elections with a My Pillow.
Correct.
Yeah, you were going to say something, Anat? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, see why I found this woman at the BART station and I brought her home with me? Is that a good idea that I had?
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. I'm just kidding. Wow, Lauren, that's a lot.
It's just one day too. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Wait till we see tomorrow. Can I ask some follow-up questions?
Yeah, go.
My first follow-up question is, why Georgia? Why Fulton County? Like, why? I mean, you said they found some patsies but like, why do you think this selection happened there?
So I assume this audience is well aware and remembers that Joe Biden winning Georgia, even though it was not necessary for 270, particularly rankled Trump and the MAGA world being a stronghold for Republicans in the Deep South. And I think the meaning of Georgia going to a Democrat for the first time in so many decades, and that Black voters in the South, in Georgia specifically overall, and in Fulton County and Atlanta, in John Lewis's district, the reason why we were all, the good guys, were so inspired was exactly the opposite impact. And I think it is for me, it's fundamentally a racialized conversation about American history and the Confederacy in the modern time. And why, right? We're all living through it. Anat and I were just telling horror stories about everything that happened in the 2020 aftermath. Biden winning, then they threw the disinformation. Alex Jones was literally marching around our state capitol. They went after election workers in Fulton County like Ruby Freeman, racialized attacks saying that they were stuffing ballots in suitcases. All of this happens, and then there's the Senate runoff for the majority of the Senate that happened January 5th. And then obviously those two races were won for Democrats. I think the fixation on Atlanta as the Black center of the South and in many ways of our country and American culture and being this Southern stronghold, they became completely fixated with it. And I just want to remind everybody, if we would have lost Georgia, he still would have won the presidency. But he was so focused on overturning the Georgia results. And remember Ruby Freeman and her daughter, Shay Moss? He put them up on the Jumbotron and said that they were, reminds me of like the welfare queen attacks of the 90s, sort of blamed them for like trafficking documents. These were normal hourly workers who become friends, right? Like these are normal people. So I think you can't pull apart what has gone on here with the history of our country, the history of the Confederacy, the history and role Black voters played in all those wins. So it has become the center point of his obsession, right? And his minions and the vigilantes and the folks in the Election Integrity Network, led by Cleta Mitchell. Cleta herself was on the phone call when they tried to call our Secretary of State and said, find me the 11,000 votes. Cleta, and after the insurrection, became the ascendant thought leader and operator for the Election Integrity Network, which I call the Election Insurrection Network. And they centered so much of building that network and their agenda and professionalizing it in Georgia. So many, why would they be rolling out something nationally at this Georgia State Election Board? Well, it's because it's become such a central piece. Now, that entire network is connected in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Arizona, all of it. But Georgia, I think, has all of this symbolism, and they are just so believe that somehow the vote was stolen by Black Georgians. So I think that is part of what is going on here. But what we've seen in Maricopa County, what we're expecting to see in places like Wayne County and Michigan and other places, is this real fixation that our urban centers are corrupt. But it goes right back to Jim Crow. The language they use, I can speculate already that the language they're using today, the Georgia State Election Board, is that we need to have clean, pristine voter rolls. There is a direct line from that modern language to the language of enfranchising Black Americans for the first time in our country. It's the same language. Trump recently said, and Steve Bannon and all of those folks have recently said, they want to make sure the right people can vote, which is why they want the SAVE Act to pass. And so I think one of the most important things we have to understand is we are in the same fight today as we were throughout American history. What is citizenship? Who gets it? Who's 3/5 a man? Who's 100% a man? Who deserves to vote? People say to me all the time, and I know Anat, you know this, like, what is happening? What is happening is the same thing that's always been fraught in our country and always been fought in our country. We're just living it in a different kind of way. And very privileged white people are also experiencing it in a way that they had not. So that's a long answer to your question, Anat, but I try to remind myself and our team at Fair Fight when we're doing this work, this is not anomalous. This is the American experiment. This is about the fact that we are we're having a very public battle about immigrants, about who deserves to vote, who deserves to be here, who deserves to have dignity. And these are all kind of knit together.
Yep. I have a half joke then a serious question. I think another aspect of why Trump thought he could do it in Georgia, and also sort of says how extreme it was, is that looking at the way in which Brian Kemp used his position as Secretary of State in 2018 to undermine the election against Stacey, he figured he had a kindred spirit to appeal to. But this was even too far for that. Now, the serious question, I think what you're saying about everyone asking um, what happened is that what's been going on for so long in half the country is suddenly being noticed by the other half as if something had actually changed in this white Christian nationalist Jim Crow movement. And if you would, I think that it would be really valuable to hear your special perspective as a leader in the South about sort of this, especially since 2008, sort of disjunction between the way in which all of this was building there and the the folks who should have been there to at least raise an alarm, if not begin to fight back at a national level, were quiet.
That's a really big question and a really big topic. And for those of you, this is something that Mike and I have been talking about for some time. uh, yeah, I think this is all caught up in some of the same conversation that Anat did at the beginning, which is why are we all collectively struggling to meet the moment, which is the way our political ecosystem has been run has been centrally focused on a 270 strategy for president, and everything has flowed from that. And so that has meant that the way investment has flowed uh, has always had a priority for states that are part of that ecosystem, which means the South hasn't been in that conversation until Stacey ran for governor in 18, and she was able to show that the state was truly competitive, right? Like we were able to demonstrate it and then starting to show it. But because so much of our ecosystem, all types of money and all types of activity are driven by sort of the electoral prospects. And ever since we lost our 60 US Senate seats that we had under Obama, it has sort of redoubled the fact that that investment has gone to a smaller swath of states. I mean, we all can remember when um, we had moderate Democrats like Landrieu in Louisiana in the US Senate, and we had such a bigger coalition. And so there are many answers to this question, but one of the things that I've witnessed firsthand that's happened is you had operatives, you had candidates, but you had operatives, organizers, consultants who had experience working in a much more diverse set of states. And that has just really dropped off. But at the same time, I fundamentally don't believe we have a talent issue, right? We have a kind of funding ecosystem issue and a lack of organizing issue. And so when you combine those two, as we go into the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, this is something we're going to all have to really collectively reckon with on how we build sort of a new collective future. But the thing I will say is having, Stacey and I met when she was a new minority leader, and we put together this like private, audacious plan to win state legislative seats and do all these things and work with this huge number of people, with not just her and I, to build a thing. Talent and leadership and supporting talent and leaders is one of the most important things that we can collectively do because we have the talent. We've got to start connecting people with resources and the networks to make the kind of change we need. And why I think remembering our American history is so important. To your question on like half of America sort of tuning in on this stuff that the other half of America has known, right? Which is like inequality is out of control, costs are out of control, home ownership is out of reach, higher ed is out of reach, like all the stuff that now is in the zeitgeist as like public discourse because middle class and upper middle class white people are now struggling with those things. So therefore it's now mainstream. Is that we've got to wrestle and deal with the South because they have been orchestrating a gutting of the Voting Rights Act And that is fundamentally about our entire political ecosystem today, is organized around those sets of representational norms and rules. And that is about to be busted up entirely. And that is going to change it for everybody. If you're sitting here in Oakland, California, if you're sitting in Washington, D.C., or if you live in Atlanta, that is going to upend how our politics fundamentally works. And where that's going to go, we have to view the crisis as an opportunity. That's how I view it, even though it's terrible. But our institutions are failing us collectively right now. And so we don't want to fall in the trap of defending them. We want to think about how we build a new world together.
Yeah. Before we go to Calais, which is, I think, where that heads, I want to add a couple things about it. One, I think you're absolutely right that there are a certain set of funders who have been really just laser focused on 270. But I think it's also important to recognize that with the brief exception of the late 50s through the 60s, the national attention on Jim Crow and the practices in the South was virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
And that's the default position of national media and the national culture. And it's more than like people we rightly disdain making bad decisions about the last couple $1 million, right? It's more structured
Absolutely.
into a kind of bias against paying attention and pretending it doesn't exist and isn't always there ready, not just to subvert the rights of the people living there, but now to try to extend it here. And that, like, nap that was taken between the end of Reconstruction and the Civil Rights Movement was really terrible, and is what faces us if we don't really realize that this is such a pivotal moment.
I actually
Yeah, go ahead.
farther.
Yeah.
Be it for me to win the Michael Podhorzer Eeyore Award and say, actually, did you all know that was an official award?
I'm familiar with the concept, yes.
Yeah.
I would say that not just ignoring it, but actually actively admonishing people for daring to name it,
Right.
as if the naming of racism were actually what is divisive and problematic rather than the racism itself.
Right.
And it's to return to a theme that Mike and I had often, and Lauren and I in our spare time, in our hobby time,
Right.
not in front of an audience. Yeah, just let's not make the argument. Let's not fight the fight. Let's not tell the truth. Let's just try to sweep it all under the rug and eke out things at the margins, which, as Lauren said, you can have extraordinarily exceptional leaders who somehow move heaven and earth to make things happen, like capturing state leg seats. But fundamentally, the rot is there, and the not talking about it somehow didn't make it go away. So I think it's more than a nap. I think it's like an induced coma. And I guess where I would echo Lauren on the, yes, it's absolutely horrific. And also it's an opportunity, because at least now there is no choice. At least I believe there is no choice but to actually confront this thing.
Yeah. First of all, let the record show Knapp on paper may not seem this way, but that was ironic.
Fine.
Never always have to worry about that. But more importantly, I don't take the Eeyore point, because that is fatalism. And I don't think that I think I'm anything but fatalistic about it. I think that, like Baldwin says, no problem can be solved unless it's faced. And so, we have to face the reality of what we're up against in order to actually come up with the strategies and commitment and courage to do what it takes. Otherwise, we fall back into the easy but ineffective, let's win the next election somewhere. Or, the things that are sort of really important, but are really meant to distract us from the kinds of movements we need to build, strategies we need to do, and so forth. Also, before I go to Calais, I realize I also want to say about the other reason why that half of the country has been under that, under what we're talking about, is it's also the region that, beginning with enslavement, but moving on to right to work, has basically been a union-free zone. And therefore, there's no institutional base for working people or for us to act collectively. And at the same time, especially evangelical churches in the region operate as a political movement. And that is part of the challenge there, is that to a greater extent than in the rest of the country, they have a very powerful way to act collectively and mobilize votes that is not matched in the same way in an institutional way. But let's get to Calais, because one of the things I really wanted to ask you about with that is, but first explain Calais to people. But because I think that if they've heard about the recent challenges that are being heard at by Roberts Court, where it's about majority minority districts, my sense when I talk to people is, and I'm going to be a little flip about it, is that people see that as a kind of affirmative action for politicians, right? That they're and look at it from the perspective of people who want to be in Congress. And it's really important for people to understand the roots of what's at stake, because it's really about whether people are given the opportunity to vote for someone who will actually represent their interests. So go ahead. And you've done some great studies on this.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate the way you asked the question, because I think there's some really big disconnects. And I'm not going to repeat that attack, but the attack you just made is the one they are building towards. And it is very dangerous. So I think the baseline is that Calais is a case out of Louisiana around the successful addition of a Black majority congressional seat that ended up getting challenged. And it got challenged in the way we are seeing this autocratic movement overall, which is that the argument is this very specious, radical, dangerous argument that a district that allows Black Louisianans representation is itself discriminatory. And so a group of white voters challenged it. And long story short is, like Citizens United and other hugely impactful cases on our political system, the court asked the parties to come and re-argue, and they had a second hearing this term in October after it was heard originally in the previous term. So October 15th, the parties went, and LDF, the Legal Defense Fund, is the plaintiff here representing the parties in Louisiana fighting for fair representation in the additional congressional district. The bottom line is the Federalist Society Court under John Roberts has a strong disdain for the Voting Rights Act, and they obviously have a majority. And from the type of questions the justices asked during that hearing, it is very clear the Federalist Society majority does not like the Voting Rights Act. They all dislike it for different reasons and all have different theories about how and why it should be gutted. The thing that this community needs to understand is why Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is what's at issue here, has been considered, quote, the crown jewel of the Voting Rights Act, is because it doesn't rely on proving intentional discrimination. To have a Section 2 seat in Congress, in the state legislature, on a county commission, on a city council, on a school board, and we're going to come back to this point, you just have to be able to demonstrate that there's racially disparate voting. And if the minority racial or ethnic group cannot elect the candidate of their choice if they're in a district with the majority and the majority race, ethnicity of white folks would not elect their candidate of choice, so there's racially polarized voting, that racial minority group deserves their opportunity to represent their candidate of choice at any level of government, right? Not just Congress, but powerfully Congress. And so why these cases have been so powerful, and there's just very human, normal language. It's like, these districts need to be reasonably represented, right? Like those sorts of, so for example, in Georgia, my adopted home state, southeastern Georgia, for those of you who are familiar with our state, like Albany and up that whole area to Columbus, Georgia, is heavily African American. And so there is a CBC member who represents that area, Sandra Bishop, a Black candidate, right? And that is a VRA protected seat, right? Because it's been fought over. And we know that there are a lot of Black people there. They can't elect their candidate of choice without it. There are VRA seats. There's no definitive list, so don't go Googling it. We all have a pretty good idea of what they are, but it's not like an official list. But there are VRA seats in California, Texas, red states, blue states, my home state of Ohio, et cetera. This is not just a red state phenomenon. This is everywhere, right? Because racism and discrimination are an American issue, not a Southern issue. So they're gunning to gut the Voting Rights Act, similar to how they gutted part of the Voting Rights Act through the Shelby decision, which was during the Obama term, out of the decision out of Alabama. That was really the first big shot against the Voting Rights Act. This is sort of the death shot of the Voting Rights Act. So the court will need to rule by the end of its term, which could go as late as early July this year. We're expecting them to rule any day now. In fact, Friday is another decision day. We're all sort of preparing and organizing in a bunch of different ways. Our analysis, we did a joint analysis with Black Voters Matter, is that unfettered Southern Republicans who can move maps quickly, because I imagine we have a lot of people who are in blue states on this. You have redistricting commissions. You have different ways that map drawing gets done in blue states. In the South, these are simple state legislative processes. They don't require supermajorities to pass new maps. They are just simple majorities, and the governor can sign or veto, except in North Carolina, where they've stripped the governor's power because Democrats have been winning, and it's just a legislature. So why this is so immediately actionable is if the decision comes on Friday, we expect a set of Southern states to go ahead and immediately redraw and try to have new districts for Congress and down ballot for the fall. If the decision goes into the summer, it'll be practically impossible from like a practicality standpoint for that to happen, but we'll then move into state legislative races. So this will completely remake how all of our politics is done. And as Mike sort of signaled, yes, this would be 19, we believe, unfettered. The Republicans could ultimately in the South gut Black political power and draw themselves 19 congressional seats in the South, permanently locking a federal majority. 191 seats, we believe they could redraw in state legislatures and lock us into permanent super minorities in many places. Obviously would cause some big political realignment and then further down ballot. The top line, though, the headline here is MAGA, Trump, and the autocrats understand that their most expedient route to total control is the gutting of Black political power. Period. And that is something I think is lost on a lot of progressives and operatives. They don't understand the connection, but the other side does. And so I have now a new term of art, Anat and Michael, that I've been using. It's well known that I am a lesbian and we talk about gay allies. So my staff laughs at me, but I've been calling myself and others Black voter allies, Black American allies. We all have to understand our collective fates of a multiracial democracy that actually delivers for people. At its core is about whether or not Black Americans are full citizens and have full voting rights and representation, because that is the group of Americans that if we collectively disenfranchise, and I mean disenfranchise in a broadest possible sense, we have a very, very big problem. So it's time for all of us to get on the anti-racist train, on the Black empowerment train, and to understand our nation's history and to understand where we are today up against a white nationalist movement that is looking at demography and trying to protect their white sons. They're very clear on the mission. Our side, in my view, is not. And every day I am trying to figure out how we can best support and move the needle on this new phase we're going to be entering into as we lose Section 2.
Yeah, that's a great background for people and explanation. I think like saying that Roberts has a disdain for the Voting Rights Act is a bit too generous. I think
Very
that
much. Yes.
I think that I would say more that he has an enthusiasm for white supremacy, right? That
Strong enthusiasm.
and which is like why he has a disdain for the Voting Rights Act. And for Lauren mentioned the Shelby case, which I'm pretty sure most people know just how like um, seismic that was. I'll remind people, and maybe someone can throw the weekend reading that I dealt with this on. But during it, the argument that Scalia made was that despite the fact that it had just been reauthorized, the Voting Rights Act had just been reauthorized almost unanimously, its unanimous support was evidence that it needed to be repealed, that that he said something almost literally, that the Voting Rights Act was a racial entitlement, that that was too hard for the political branch to undo. And like, unfortunately, that really didn't create a stir among his fellow justices. And as far as I can tell, no one noted that the reality is that up until that point, the American elections had been and are racing back to being a racial entitlement for white people.
Correct.
And that the quote racial entitlement of the Voting Rights Act was to have the same voice as the rest of the country did. And go ahead, Anat.
Yeah, I just want to chime in. And now everybody knows why we wanted Lauren here. Lauren, can you just be here every week, please? Doesn't have to be at my house, but because your wife might take issue with that. But basically, what I want to underscore, just from a language messaging perspective, which is my own, is that this argument, insofar as we've had any argument at all around the ability to vote and the existence of a vote and the existence of elections, has been taken to be sort of enough. And instead, what is actually at stake is not just whether a vote theoretically exists in some universe that you may or may not be able to access, but a much deeper and more profound thing, which is, are you going to be represented?
That's right.
Will there be a human being who actually reflects your interests and governs in your name? And so as we've been wrapped up, and I'm just talking about the messaging, truly in this, like, there is voting, there isn't voting, there is voter suppression, there isn't voter suppression, your vote is your voice, your vote is your voice, you can't vote, you can't vote. That's all kind of irrelevant when, if what you have to vote for is like, I don't know, spam or slop, like, congratulations, I guess,
right.
like spam or slop are your options. And what's ironic about this, and as you've hit straight to the heart of it, and the way that Black folks in this country are, and arguably have always been, much like Native Americans in this country, kind of the canaries in every single coal mine. The ability to vote for spam or slop, if I come up with something better, I will. I mean, that's what happens at a broader level when you have two people running who are both beholden to a set of billionaires, and often not even different billionaires, the exact same ones. Like, eventually all of us are in the spam or slop, but you get to pick them category. And yeah, I'm just underscoring what you're saying in a different way, which is that we're talking about people's ability, no matter what you look like, where you come from, what's your background, what's your accent, what's your zip code, to be able to have people in power who authentically govern in your name.
That's right.
Right. The Voting Rights Act is most obviously about whether you can vote, but it's most importantly about whether your vote will count.
and if you have representation for your
That's
issue.
right. Yeah. So looking at sort of a way to think about what Lauren was saying, as if that wasn't like terrifying enough in terms of what it would mean if Southern legislatures went ahead and did that. Right now in America, about 2/3 of us vote for a candidate for Congress who wins. And part of the reason for that is just how sorted we all know we are, even if we're not gerrymandered. And in the South, it's about the same right now for white people and about 50% for blacks. So even though the Voting Rights Act is there, it's still not creating exact parity. Under the scenario that Lauren described, only about a quarter of black people in the South would end up voting for someone that, like, with being represented by the person they voted for, and that's mostly because, like, the 10% who vote for Republicans will do well. Um, the that is how serious it is. It's really sort of effectively moving us back to almost pre-Voting Rights Act scenario.
Absolutely. And one thing, I'm seeing there was a bunch in the chat, Mike, about, oh, if this happens, blue states should succeed, or blue states this is not this. The South will be the first to act here, guys. But the project of dismantling black political power as it relates to our politics will also be a project of blue states. And so we have to collectively get our heads together here, because what's coming to the blue states where Democrats control redistricting in the aftermath of the busting up of the Voting Rights Act, it's going to be an entire conversation about, should black political districts be gutted to make room for more white, moderate congressional districts? That will be the way it's described. And it will be described as a way to push back on the racial gerrymandering of the South. We all have to grapple with the fact that there are large black populations in blue states who deserve representation. But it's going to get us right in the thick of a whole different kind of conversation than we've ever had before in our lifetime, which is, what does that mean, right? We know that certain members in Congress have asked for very high-performing Democratic districts, right? And probably that's a bit excessive, but we still need the project of fair representation for everybody. So do not think this is a Southern problem. This is about the history of the South, and 60% of Black Americans live in the traditional South. However, this is going to be coming to a district near you, no matter where you live. And this is why we have to all think about all of these pieces going forward, and why we have to we need to understand the rights theory of the case enough so that we can have that framework in mind as we go into the redistricting battles post the Voting Rights Act, which are going to be very fraught. So here are the three vectors that the Project 2025 folks, this is how they see it. They call it their three vectors, and it's one, the partisan gerrymandering, mid-decade gerrymandering that they we just are living through. Their second is the gutting of Section 2. And their third is remaking how the census does not count certain sets of folks. Their calculus is, with those three changes that they are hell-bent on making or are being made for them, that they can win over 40 seats in Congress and lock power in state legislatures. So those pieces bring the full country into the conversation. So I don't want to overly beat up on the South here. The South is the canary in the coal mine. And then the other piece I would throw out for discussion is, in terms of the gutting of Black political power and agency in this country being the most expedient way for autocracy to take over. There's an organization called Onyx Impact, which is the leading effort to understand disinformation and propaganda in Black online spaces. And they have published a report called the Blackout Report. I highly suggest you read it. It goes through all the ways, through the anti-DEI work, through the gutting of the federal government, through a whole slew of initiatives just since Trump 2.0 on how Black agency and economic autonomy are under attack by this administration. When you put that together with the assaults on voting, it makes a fuller picture of my larger argument and what Mike said, that this is a white nationalist project. And these sort of pieces all work together.
Absolutely. And I hope, when you're talking about beating up on the South, I hope one of the things that people, if they don't already, see and listening and seeing Lauren is that there's another part of the South, which is people who are extremely courageous and determined and have really been fighting much more difficult battles than most of the rest. And that so many of the people, whether it's Martin Luther King or John Lewis, just name it, who have led our country to be a better version of itself, who came from that crucible.
I would also,
And we have to really listen to and respect them for what they've already learned in fighting fascism or authoritarianism or exactly what's coming for us, instead of thinking we know it all. Go ahead.
yeah, I would also just remind folks of perhaps the most obvious thing, which is that there's a poem already about this that we know. And it talks about first they came for. So yeah, I don't know where it is we think we would be going. Because regardless, we share a land mass. But whatever this, succession
Yeah.
plan where blue states save ourselves, I guess we're moving to Hawaii and Alaska, because I'm not really sure what else is on order. California is nicely far away, but unfortunately still attached. Yeah.
Look, the project of organizing a multiracial democracy is all of our collective project. And I've now been a Georgian for about 11 years and gotten to work with and learn from so many incredible organizers and leaders. We don't have, like I said earlier, we have the talent, we have the local organizing. And I think what we're going to see as we get this decision from SCOTUS and the fallout happens, just like what we saw in Minnesota, what we're going to find out is the kinds of local fights and battles and local leaders we don't yet know, the organizing that's going to happen, because everybody's thinking about Congress, but Congress is right now an institution that's failing us. We'll see how the congressional fights will be very important, the congressional district fights. But y'all, it's going to be our county commission districts, as our state legislatures try to control racial gerrymander in the local level. We're going to see teachers, we're going to see communities, we're going to see local folks all across the South start organizing and working on things like never before, because they're already doing that. We had a huge win, for example, in Louisiana, the We Collectively Not Fair fight. A couple of years ago, 2 years ago, Jeff Landry, who's a little governor of Louisiana, patsy for Trump, thought he could jam through a bunch of constitutional amendments. And it was shot down strongly. And Black voters, who make up about 30% of the electorate, voted at 40% of the electorate. And the multiracial coalition that squashed that. There's a lot, part of our internal banter at Fair Fight is macro, big picture, things are very bad. But the wins in the South we have experienced over the past couple of years, special elections for state legislature, districts that were, double-digit Trump going to really progressive Democrats, busting. Last year, we got to help an effort to bust a Republican supermajority in both chambers in the Mississippi legislature, thanks to successful VRA litigation. There were a whole slew of mayors in Louisiana last year who were first-time Black mayors, first-time Democratic mayors winning their localities. We've seen incredible efforts on mutual aid pushing back against ICE in the South. I mean, they don't get, to Michael's point, some of these smaller wins and some of the smaller organizing doesn't get the amount of national attention, certainly. But I could sit here for the rest of the call and give all these examples of all kinds of wins all across the board. And so there is energy, there is talent. I know this is like kind of a radical thing to say, as awful as it all is. I am ultimately optimistic because I think as the other side of bad guys, I call it good guys and bad guys at this point, make it so plain who they are, it broadens our coalition so much so, right? Because that is the new phase we're going to go into. And let's learn our history on how we had the Civil Rights Movement and Voting Rights Act movement previously. That, and that really came in many ways out of the entire organizing across the South. And Atlanta has a really special place in that history. So, long story short is it's going to get worse before it gets better. Even if we have a really great midterm, this is the fight, right? This is the American fight. This is the fight the rest of our lives. And I think we're going to learn a ton and we're going to build something new. One of the proactive things we're doing in coalition on the Voting Rights Act, if people want to help, is real quickly is we're working with LDF, which is Legal Defense Fund, Southern Poverty Law Center, a couple national organizations, and then hyper-local organizations to introduce state voting rights acts. We don't think they're going to pass, but it's really powerful organizing and messaging tool around these issues. I got to be at the press conference for it a couple weeks ago in Georgia. Mississippi introduced one earlier this year at Louisiana. And so there's tons of ways we're already moving on organizing stakeholders, getting the word out to voters. Here in California, you already have a state voting rights act. Check your blue state to see if you have one on the books. As things are changing federally, states are going to become really important on the voting rights fight as we go forward.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I want to stay on this local thing for a moment because obviously a lot of questions and a lot of feedback that people always have and I think it's a good sign is like, but what can we be doing? But what can we be doing? And I'm sure you get this question 5,000 times a day. Maybe even when you're like at school pickup, what can we be doing? So we talked the other day about this groundswell of folks who have been newly engaged in rapid response around immigrant defense and have organized themselves in hyper-local ways, whether that's Protect the 612 in Minneapolis or Protect the RP, Rogers Park in Chicago, or Bay Rising here where I live, and shout out to your own local rapid response network. There are folks hungry for marching orders and they would like to be told what to do next. And one of the things that you raised that I found really fascinating was the idea of actually going to your own Board of Elections meetings that Republicans have reliably been doing. I mean, rank and file, not leaders, just regular folks. And that's a very interesting proposition, right? That's something that you can look up and do. Talk a little bit about like if someone on this call is inspired, they're like, I'm gonna go look up my Board of Elections. Like I'm gonna see when they meet. What should they do there? Just like listen, take notes.
Yeah, I don't care where you live in America right now, you are 90% chance that there are voter suppression zealots, individual actors, or more likely networked folks with Cleta Mitchell or other organizations like True the Vote, et cetera, going to your local county or parish, if you're in Louisiana, or depending on where you live, it's done a little bit differently, but your local elections board, superintendent, or county recorder meetings, depending on where you live, they have weaponized election administration and they train activists to go. And what do they train their people to do? They train their people to go to curtail access to voting, to lobby for less early voting locations, for stricter like deadlines around vote by mail, right? Like they have a whole set of tools for their activists, and they've been doing this for some time. In fact, when you go and check out your local Board of Elections or supervisors, whatever you call it, where you live, it is likely that one or more of the Republicans on the board, usually there are partisan members of the board appointed by the county party or some sort of partisan system, and then some mix of partisan, nonpartisan people, depends on how it is. Many, not all, but many, if not most of the Republicans now who hold these elected or appointed local elections positions are part of the national anti-voter movement. And so they And it doesn't matter what kind of state you live in. You could be in a dark blue state here, like California. So one of the things that Fair Fight does in communities across the South, and with allyships, this goes on in other states, is help support pro-democracy, good guys, to go there. So there's a couple things it's not hard. All you need to do is find out when they are. They're usually during the day or in an evening, once a month usually, and they're mostly pretty mundane. Your job is just to, when public comment comes, thank you so much for being a volunteer board of elections, or thank you so much. I had a great experience voting last week, or last week I actually had trouble voting last week. It looks like we have a poll worker shortage. How can community help? You're literally just there to show that support, because these folks in many jurisdictions are getting screamed at. They're getting pushed back. They're getting followed out of their location. There's a whole set of activism. And again, it does not matter what county. I'll give you an example. Cleta Mitchell's Election Insurrection Network is active in over 23 states. Okay. That's a lot of states. They have a stated mission to expand to all 50 states this year. And even if they're not having active chapters in your state, their network is in your states. So literally, I call it flanking or shoring up election administration. Literally physically being present. You can take notes to kind of lay low and understand what the vibes are. You will very quickly understand what's happening. And we need good guys just standing up and speaking. You will find out things like, is there a poll worker shortage? So then you can organize your network. If you're involved in an indivisible chapter, you can say, there's going to be a big crisis. There's going to be a big crisis of poll workers this fall because of the intimidation the DOJ and others are doing. So if you think about the next couple of months, if you have time to start putting these meetings on your calendar, you'll be able to help get us collectively ahead of the poll worker crisis. Another thing you can do now, today, besides look up your local board of elections or supervisors, go sign up, go to powerthepolls.com or powerthepolls.org. Michael's going to tell us.
I'm sure, I don't know, but we should.
Yeah, I can't reach.
Look it up.
And sign up. It's a national nonpartisan network to connect people with poll worker opportunities. And I think many people know there's been a real crisis in poll workers. It's been aging population and also a politicized situation where a lot of people have dealt with attacks. 99.9% of poll workers have zero issues. It's a very safe job. Often you'll get paid a little stipend. You just need some time. You'll get trained. You'll get supported. So sign up for Power of the Polls today. Get involved in local election administration. Some of the meetings are streamed. Many states, you can stream them. You can join remotely. It's obviously better if you can go in person, but you can join remotely. And in the public comment on the Zoom, you can say, thank you so much for doing this work. Just running elections has become a fraught enterprise. In Fulton County, it's been devastating because of the attacks. A couple of weeks ago, Anat and Mike, we had the monthly meeting, and the voter registration director for Fulton County was giving her report to the board and just crying because the pressure was so intense. Fulton County runs excellent elections. They have they have the most early vote locations. They have a lot of innovation. They have very secure elections. It's sick how they've become the butt of this Trump joke and the target of all this vitriol and hate. And I saw the Zoom because it was on Zoom. I was sitting at my desk, and it just breaks your heart. So when you go to a meeting, and if it's fraught like that, then you literally are just the person standing at public comment and be like, I'm so grateful to have Betty Sue do this work, right? And I can just tell you how much it means to people. So I think I've beaten the horse fully on why this is so important. But we have to do this work today, right? Because they don't steal an election or interfere overnight. Democracy, is something we all have to kind of raise our hand and be a part of.
And you have to do one more thing.
No, before I
give money to Fair Fight or Fair Fight Action.
Thank you. Fairfight.com. Thank you, Anat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Give money.
So we're about to have to jump in. Yes, absolutely. That is an important thing for you to do. I should also mention, because many of you are already politically active, that in terms of what stepping up to be a poll watcher, that in many states, of course, it's different, like all over the country, the Democratic and Republican Party get the opportunity to fill those slots first.
That's right.
And so if you're already involved in politics in your community, a faster and more certain way to become a poll watcher is to go straight to your Democratic committee person or whatever the local thing is.
Yeah, let's pause there for a minute, because
Yeah.
Michael talking about poll watchers, which are
Yeah.
really partisan placement. We need
Or
those.
poll workers too.
And then poll workers
Yeah.
are the nonpartisan. Usually that's through a county or local hiring process. But we need both.
Yeah. But also, like, for many, like, people that, to not get too technical, like, there's poll watchers outside, but the people who, like, are there when you check in to see if you're registered, in many states, both parties get to have people there. That's
Correct.
sort of the way elections work, as opposed to having an independent commission or something.
That's
And
right.
so I'm just saying that if you're willing to put that kind of commitment in, you're going to get that seat at the registration table faster if you go through your party and you're more certain to get it. But that comes far short almost everywhere from everybody who's needed, which is why Power of the Polls was created. We are a little over time, but I'd be remiss as I go through the chat not to observe how much praise your wardrobe got again.
Mine, not yours.
Yeah, no.
And I think that your interest and reaction is sort of getting traction here. But I'm really so glad, Lauren, you joined us, and I hope everybody really understands more clearly the challenges we're up against, but also inspired that that's not a reason to withdraw, but to advance. So see you all again, hopefully Monday, which is not the usual time for Jason Stanley. And Anat, I think you won't be on for the next Wednesday. So I'll be having someone else who will attempt to fill your floor chimes if people get that joke at this moment.
An insult to think that's the brand I wear. We have to end this now.
Well, no, we should all actually go out and buy floor chimes, because if people have any idea what we're talking about, it's basically Trump has decided to buy shoes for everybody in the cabinet because he thought like they weren't wearing the right shoes, and he bought some floor chimes and lots of memes with people wearing the wrong, cabinet members wearing the wrong size floor chimes and all of that. But the reason I said if you're buying shoes, you should buy Florsheim is because Florsheim himself was one of the parties against the Trump tariffs, and did not know about his shoes being recommended, and when asked about it on NPR, he gave a sly no comment. So,
And they're from Wisconsin.
and okay, so there you go. All right. Well, that's a good place to end. See y'all next time.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye.